All right. All right. Hello, everyone. We're back. This is Joe's Hot Takes 25. This is a podcast where we tackle tough topics. We ask important questions, have real conversations. Um, I'm your host. I'm Joe. Today, we're going to dive into one of the most complex and sensitive topics in our society. Let's talk about racism in America. Well, I want to point out this is not about taking sides. This is not pushing an agenda. This podcast is about asking questions, sharing perspectives, and hopefully sparking some thoughtful conversation. Want to get your juices flowing. I want you to open your mind and I want you to think about things. That's why I'm asking the questions. That's all. All right, let's get into it. This is a raw, uncut, unedited podcast, so I apologize for clearing my throat. But I don't want to murky the waters with starting to do a bunch of editing. So here we go. Let's start with segment number one. What is racism? So first, let's define racism. In its broadest sense, racism is the unfair treatment of people based on their race or ethnicity. It can be individual, one person discriminating against another, or institutional, when policies or systems create disadvantages for certain groups. But there's the big question out there. When someone says, this is my big question, I want to understand this. When someone says that was racist, or don't be a racist, I want to know what that means. What is that actually based on? Is that based on their personal experiences, things that they've actually seen or lived through? Or is it shaped by society, by the media, or maybe by history? I've spent over 30 years in law enforcement. I've worked in Superior Court. I've worked in a large school district. I've been involved in government for many, many years. And through all those experiences, I've interacted with people from all walks of life. And I've worked with people and interacted with people in very, very good situations and unfortunately very, very bad situations. So the one thing that I've learned from all of this, from working with and being involved and experiencing so many people in so many situations from so many different backgrounds, this is one thing I've learned. We're all the same. We are all the same. I don't care what your race, religion, what your ethnicity, it does not matter. We are all the same. We all experience fear the same way. We all find joy in similar things. Say something funny, people smile. We all cherish family and friendships. Regardless of race, background, economic status, it does not matter. We are all the same. So the question is, why does racism persist? Why? Well, let me jump into segment two here, the changing face of America. And then we'll try to answer some of these questions. Right now, today, America is more diverse than ever before. Let's look at some of the numbers. This is 2023 numbers. So as of 2023, here's the racial and ethnic background of the U.S. This is the way it's posted. A little over 58% are white, non-Hispanic. Nearly 14% are Black or African American. So, and I want to clarify that in this context, Black refers to a race, while African American really refers to an ethnicity. So these two labels, if you will, are frequently interchanged or merged. So it kind of leads to the categorization of all Black people in the U.S. as African Americans, without considering or giving consideration for their distinct cultural histories and current practices. So these have become catch-all phrases. Neither here nor there, just wanted to share that information. This is information that I've researched. Moving on, about 20% of our U.S. makeup is Hispanic or Latino, a little over 1% of Native, about 6% Asian, and less than 1% of Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander. And then this is interesting. About 3% of the U.S. population consists of 2 or more races. I think that's interesting. I believe, again, I don't like to put opinions in my podcast. I just want to get the questions out there, but I kind of believe that we have more than 3% of our population that is mixed races, which is great. I think it's awesome. But I think it's underreported for whatever reason. And racism could be part of the reason why that's underreported. So that's a lot of different cultures, excuse me, languages, traditions, a lot of this all blending together. And personally, I think it's pretty incredible. So I've had the chance to travel. I've been graced with the ability to experience different cultures firsthand. I've been in Central America. I've been all over the Caribbean. I'm not trying to brag. I'm just trying to say I've been to these places. I've been to Europe. I've traveled the U.S. You know, I have a home in Puerto Rico. So, but I find it interesting that in all of my travels, you really don't have to go anywhere. Everything that you would want to experience from any other culture, they have here. Now, I'm not saying the land or the food or but the culture, the people. Here in America, we are a melting pot. We have so much diversity. We are surrounded by diversity. And it just brings up the question, so why does racism still exist? Is it something that's taught? Is it something that's being reinforced by media, for example? Or is it more? I really don't know, but I wonder why it still exists to the level that it does. So let me segue that right into the role of the media. So the media's role in shaping our views on racism, they have a very powerful position. Social media, news media, TV, movies, we see racism portrayed constantly. Sometimes it's real obvious, the racism that's portrayed in these programmings. Excuse me. Other times, it's much more subtle. It's interesting. One thing I've learned, I was a police officer, like I'd mentioned. I worked in as a public information officer, media relations supervisor for a fairly large police department. So I had a lot of interacting with the media for many years. Very close relationships with the media. So one thing I did learn, the media knows how to spin a story. If it bleeds, it leads. And that was their saying, which just means the more shocking, the more emotional, the more dramatic the stories, the more attention it's going to get. And we already know that the more attention that media gets, that means more advertisers, that means more money. So that really makes you ask the question, is there maybe an underlying financial reason that the media keeps racism alive, that keeps pointing out things? I don't know. It's just a question. Just a question. Look, don't get me wrong. Racism's real. I get it. I understand it. I'm not naive. I've been in government business for 30 plus years. I understand. There are real injustices that need to be talked about. but the way that it's presented matters. The way that we present this and the way we put it out to the public, it really matters. President Trump often talked about the fake news. Well, he's not completely wrong. And I say that because, while I won't get into politics or anything else, I'm just going to speak from my own personal experiences. The media does, in fact, shape narratives. They decide which parts of a story to highlight and which parts to kind of leave out. And unfortunately, I believe that influences how we perceive racism. I think that presents a narrative that really doesn't give us the opportunity to know all the facts, to draw a fair assumption of what really happened. So we're getting just what is presented to us. So let's move into segment 4 of this podcast, which is I want to talk a little bit about DEI and the affirmative action programs. So I want to shift gears just a little bit and talk about these programs. DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and affirmative action. Okay, DEI is really all about making the workplace and institutions more inclusive. That means acknowledging different backgrounds, ensuring fair access to opportunities, creating an environment where everyone feels valued. Sounds great, right? But here's where the debate begins. Does it actually reduce racism, or does it sometimes fuel it? Take affirmative action, for example. It was created to correct past discrimination by ensuring that minorities and underrepresented groups have opportunities, the same opportunities as other groups. But some people argue that instead of actually creating fairness, it sometimes creates new biases. By making it more inclusive for one group may make it less inclusive for another. So are these programs actually hurting us or helping us? So that's kind of the question. Do the programs hurt us or do the programs help us? Here's the interesting part of that. If we roll back into segment 3, where we talk a little bit about the media, maybe these programs are helpful and they're set up to do the right things, but how is it presented to us? How, when there is an inequality or an injustice that occurs that we can tie back into DEI or affirmative action, how is it presented to the public? These are just questions. Just want you to think about it. Think about what you're being told, what you see, what you hear. This is why I always say fact check, fact check, fact check. Go back and make sure that the information you're receiving is accurate before you decide to repost or get on a soapbox on the corner. All right, so let's talk about, I'm going to roll into what segment number 5 is on this podcast. Is racism a global issue? Well, let's zoom out for a moment. Let's zoom back up into outer space a little bit and let's look at the world as a whole. Let's get that good view of our world. And what do we see? Racism is not just an American problem. It is a global issue. Across the world, racism exists for different reasons. In some places, it's cultural. In other places, it's economic. And in others, it's based on historical conflicts. I have a good friend from India who talked about the untouchables. And I don't know if this is still predominant today, but what he spoke of was, years ago. But the untouchables were a group of individuals that cleaned the bathrooms, the toilets, the places where people defecated and urinated. These people were called the untouchables because nobody wanted to touch them because their job was so dirty. They were a whole different class set of people, treated totally different. Not because they were of a different race, but because they were of a different economic position in that culture. Interesting. We look at historical conflicts that create bias and racism. We see it happening in the Middle East all the time. We see groups of, for example, you have groups of individuals of tribes, villages, so on, that have historically been involved in conflict, and they don't like each other for no other reason. Has nothing to do with the way they look, the way they talk. It has nothing to do with their socioeconomic position in their culture. It only has to do with historical conflicts, and they don't like each other because they've never liked each other, and they will never like each other unless something gets fixed. How do you fight that for racism? That one's a tough one. So why does it seem that America is kind of a focal point, much more so than other countries, as a racist, biased country? And that's interesting. I don't know that it's necessarily true. There's a lot of issues. I know there's issues in Europe that are stemming from a clash of religious cultures, Muslims and Christians, or even those who are of non-faiths, different faiths, clashing with the Muslims. There were situations in Spain where groups of Muslims wanted to practice their form of law, Sharia law. You know, when you come to a new country, I don't know. I'm trying to, I don't want to make an opinion. I just want to open this up to thoughts. How do you handle that? If you come to a new country, do you set up your old traditions in the new country and do you follow your old traditions and laws? Or do you somehow morph into melding in, blending in as much as possible with your new country? I don't know. This kind of goes back to my immigration podcast from before. But it's a real problem. It's a real thing, and we understand it. And I think that we are constantly reminded of racism and bias. I really believe through media, movies, and social platforms. It's just in our face all the time. So moving forward, what can we do? What can we do? Let's wrap this up. Let's throw some final thoughts in there. Are people racist because of personal experiences or because of what they see in the media? Now, some people have had personal experiences. Agreed. I don't doubt that. I don't discount that. I validate that. But a lot of people have not really, and I'm not talking about one race. I'm not talking about one culture. I'm not talking about a religion. I'm talking about people in general. I believe that here in the United States, that there are a lot of people that have not really ever experienced true racism, but they still have a bias, and they have that bias because of what they see and hear, what they're being told. I don't know. Question. That's what it is. Does constantly talking about racism help solve the problem, or does it keep it alive? Does it just compound the problem, or does it help us solve it? And how about this question? If racism has always existed worldwide, is the best way forward to stop focusing on differences and just treat each other as individuals. Don't focus on color of skin. Don't focus on the language they speak. Don't focus on their religious beliefs of this person or these peoples. Don't focus on that. Just treat each other as individuals, as humans. I don't have all the answers, but I do know this. Actions do speak louder than words. So maybe instead of just talking about racism all the time and shoving it in our faces on the news or in these movies or TV shows, maybe what we should do is just start living a little differently, being more inclusive with one another, being more understanding of one another, and certainly being more kind. I mentioned that I have a place in Puerto Rico. I've traveled to Puerto Rico many times. I don't speak Spanish very well. I am clearly a gringo in a Spanish-speaking country, and yet I don't really believe I've experienced racism there. I've been treated as an equal, and I think the reason that I've been treated that way is because I try to speak Spanish. I try to understand the culture. I don't act outside of the way people in Puerto Rico and in that culture act. I try to blend in as much as I can and be a part of the community. So I've really not been treated differently being in Puerto Rico. So kindness, acceptance, those are big things. So I think what we really might want to talk about is maybe less division, less labeling, definitely more listening, definitely more understanding. And I think that's how we can find some great ways to develop discussions and questions about how do we finally start pushing racism behind us and acting as one human race. I don't know. I don't know. But I'll say this. That is it for today's episode. So I really appreciate you coming and tuning in, listening to me ramble on. I really, truly appreciate it. Um, take a look at some of the other podcasts that come out. If there's something you want to talk about, post it, and let's see if we can't dig up a conversation on it and get some questions asked and get some thoughts provoked, because that's what we're looking to do. So until next time, everyone, take care, be safe, take care of each other, and always, always stay curious.